BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Okay, so today we're continuing our discussion about Killing for Love, which is the story of Jens Soering and Elizabeth Haysom. Back in 1995, a double murder took place where the parents of Elizabeth Haysom were found dead here in the kind of eastern part of the United States, not too far from me in West Virginia. But all of the attention began to focus on her boyfriend, Jens Soering, who was an international student from Germany. And as we mentioned in part 1, and once again, by the way, we should just say that this is part 2, but if you haven't heard part 1 yet, that is fine. You can keep listening because we're going to be having somewhat of a discussion just about the case. And just to give it the most, probably the smallest kind of refresher possible. All right, as we mentioned, a double murder took place. All the attention focuses on her boyfriend, Jens Soering. They flee the country for a while, then they're kind of extradited back. And the thing is, though, is that Jens Soering confesses to the murders. But then he retracts his confession, saying he only did that because he thought that he had diplomatic immunity. His father was a diplomat, he had a diplomatic passport, and he thought that he would just either be kind of let off the hook, or perhaps at the most he would be sent back to Germany and doing 3 or 4 years in prison, and then he would be let go. But of course, that did not happen, and Jens Soering went on to serve multiple decades in a Virginia state penitentiary. Now, what really do we make of all this stuff? What I would say about this one is that it was a very vicious murder. They show you the photos of the parents of Elizabeth Haysom who were murdered, and they believe that the motivation for it was that the parents were just very controlling, very strict, and there are possible allegations of just sexual abuse. We should say there are allegations of abuse and possible incidents of sexual abuse from Elizabeth Haysom's mother committed on her, like the mother was sexually abusing her own daughter, and as we mentioned, that's actually something that happens rather frequently. It is just not often talked about or reported. Now, the whole thing is, though, why would somebody confess to a murder that they didn't commit? And in part 1, I was talking all about I've been watching Steve Wilkos for 9 or 10 years, and I was going through some episodes from his show last night right before going to bed. Nothing like that, I suppose. It's probably the best way to turn off the lights. And the thing I was just noticing is that he often talks about this, like, how could you ever confess to a crime you didn't commit? How could anyone plead guilty to a crime that they didn't commit? It happens all the time. How many times on this channel have we talked about false confessions, whether you're dealing with something in the Zodiac Killer, whether you're dealing with that one individual in the JonBenet Ramsey case who was apprehended in Thailand? People falsely confess to crimes all the time. Although the examples that we just mentioned are kind of more about how someone would do that for notoriety or fame or just attention even, or just usually, though, when I say notoriety, someone is either trying to sell their story and get a book deal, movie deal, or they just they're just an absolute sort of attention whore and they just want all eyes on them. With the case of Jens Soering, it's quite different. They actually believe, and so Jens even confesses himself, that he confessed to the murders, once again, because they thought that they would make the charges go away, diplomatic immunity and all that. But he also thought that he would be able to be reunited with his girlfriend, Elizabeth Haysom. But as we mentioned, there are a lot of similarities between this case and the case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard and Nick Godejohn. She coerces Nick Godejohn into murdering her mother, Dee Dee Blanchard, who was an abuser. And then, once you actually get to the trial and they actually find out that they're going to be serving prison time, the rewired soul said it very clearly, she's just like peace. And then that's exactly what happened with the case of Jens Soering and Elizabeth Haysom. He confesses to the murder, and then she immediately just turns on him. She immediately just kind of just says, nope, he was an absolutely horrible person, he was a disgusting person, he was an impotent person, he never had the ability to perform sexual intercourse successfully until after the murders. Like, she's even coming up with stuff like that. But we were watching the documentary Killing for Love, and the German title is Das Versprechen, and they were saying that just that the forensic evidence doesn't seem to support that Jens Soering was involved at all, and that there was not one, but 2 murderers that got off the hook for this. There were at least 2 male accomplices to Elizabeth Haysom on the night of her parents' murders. And that's just some very bizarre stuff. And you gotta wonder, though, it's like, why would Well, where was all this forensic evidence? In 1985, when these murders took place, and of course the trial's going on in 1986, DNA was not that well known. That forensic stuff was in not even its infancy, in its just like birth canal, for lack of a better term. Because you even saw in the O.J. Simpson case, 1994, 95, 96, people were still arguing about how valid is DNA. That's what Barry Scheck and Dennis Fung got into during the O.J. Simpson case. And this is 1986, nearly 10 years before that. So there obviously was, we could just sort of say that forensic technology wasn't as profound as it is now. And the documentary Killing for Love is really trying to argue that Jens Soering did not commit these murders, and he just entered a false confession thinking that he would get off for it, and that Elizabeth Haysom would also get off, and that they would just be reunited, and that they would actually be able to continue their relationship. And what I said in part one was he was 18 at the time that they had met, and, going through the late teen years, I can comprehend how some guy would make some kind of poor decisions like that. I definitely did as well. Maybe you got into a little bit of trouble yourself, no matter who you are. But when we're examining this particular case, it's like, I think that it really goes against a lot of the profiling that a woman would commit such a grisly, heinous murder, stabbing her parents just so many times, blood all over the entire house. And I would say that it goes against the traditional kind of standards that we think about when it comes to profiling of, like a psychological profile of a female killer. But it is not impossible. We've seen, stabbing cases from, women in the past. There was this one case, though, that I don't remember the names because I was just reading the article. It was a woman who was just started stabbing her husband while he was in bed. Then she went to her kid's bedroom and she tucked in the kids and said goodnight. Then she went back to her husband's bedroom and started stabbing him some more. These things do happen. So it's like, on average, the type of a sort of multiple stab wounds, kind of grisly, heinous murders are often committed by men. That's a statistic that we're just going to have to accept. But it is not impossible for a woman to commit those same types of behaviors. It's not unheard of. But the fact that you have also, was it really just one woman who's just moving around two bodies and just kind of she had accomplices, in other words. They were just trying to determine, was that Jens Soering or was that two other individuals. One of them was named James Farmer, but he passed away 2 weeks prior to the kind of investigations that they were doing for the documentary Killing for Love, which is, I think I saw that it is available on YouTube for free. I was watching it on Hulu. But let's not kid ourselves, though. It is not unheard of for somebody to confess to a crime that they didn't commit, especially when he thinks that there is some sort of benefit in it for him, which is, we're not talking about money, we're not talking about notoriety, we're talking about a relationship, a woman's love. He thought that he was in love, and he thought that he would have the possibility of being in a relationship with Elizabeth Haysom. But Sam Kinison, the comedian, had a really great thing to say about that when he's like, "Hey, it's me, love. You come on, you can trust me. I wouldn't lie to you 8 times in a row." Love is one nasty thing, and it's not always what you think it is. And then I believe Sam Kinison would go into some screaming fits at that point. But aside from that, I would also just want to point out that when you have a murder like this, and the forensic evidence is still on file, once again, this is only, let's see, now it's 2019, we're dealing with 34 years since these murders took place. They still have most of the forensic material preserved in the archives. The documentary Killing for Love was really just trying to say, why isn't this thing being commuted? Why isn't the sentence, given clemency or something? If I'm using those words correctly, a commuted sentence and clemency or something. Why isn't he being released if they have forensic evidence to suggest that he did not commit these murders? And the only thing that Jens Soering could be guilty of is that he would have provided a fake alibi for the people involved. And he doesn't even seem to know 100% who the perpetrators were, other than Elizabeth Haysom. And she was found guilty of being an accessory to murder before the fact, meaning that she was involved sort of with the planning process and all. Sounds somewhat similar to conspiracy to commit murder. There's actually an interesting thing about this that I was listening to some true crime program, I don't even remember which one, and they were talking about the concept of the death penalty. And they're like, the death penalty is almost entirely used for murders. And the second thing that comes after that is conspiracy to commit murder. You can also be, that's also one of the most frequent things that the death penalty would be used for. But I actually thought that they were going to say rape, because I remember reading like the the old sort of statistics and stuff about the death penalty, especially when they were still using hangings frequently. And rape was also something that they used the punishment of execution for, but that was way back in the past. But the point is, this was actually really relevant to the death penalty. I mean, that really ties into this case. That's one of the reasons why Jens Soering was extradited from England to the United States of America. Once again, he was a German national, but he was in England at the time. One of the reasons why he was able to be extradited was they took the death penalty off the table, because in international law, there are these things about kind of like human rights commissions and such, which say that they do not want people that are to be extradited to a country like the United States of America, where they could face the death penalty. Of course, not all states in America have the death penalty. It was actually an interesting story about that in Rhode Island in the 1850s. One person was wrongfully executed, and then they decided, hey, one person's been wrongfully executed, let's outlaw this thing. So, I mean, that was just, it took they were like, one is more than enough. It's kind of just some kind of an interesting tidbit. But when it comes to this, though, we encounter this thing many times in terms of extradition law. I've said it before on this channel, extradition law is very tricky. And the first claim that Jens Soering and I guess his defense team were trying to make was he should not be extradited to the United States of America because he could be facing the death penalty and it violates some sort of international human rights thing. And then they had to take that one off the table so he could go there. We saw almost the same thing with the case of Leonard Lake and Charles Ng, the Boneyard Killers. I've been saying it for a while on this channel that I wanted to make an upload about them, but I still have, as of today, I've not done a single upload on Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. But the big thing to say about that one is that I believe Charles Ng was a Hong Kong passport holder, but he was in Canada at the time, and Canada has apparently outlawed the death penalty, and they didn't want him extradited to the United States to face trial for the murders that he had committed and participated in. Leonard Lake, of course, committed suicide by ingesting cyanide, but Charles Ng remained alive. And then that brings into the whole thing, do people who are not United States citizens have constitutional rights, and should they kind of even care at all about what the accused in a murder case have to say at all about their kind of rights being infringed upon? I mean, it sounds like a nasty situation, but if you start trying to violate somebody's rights, it just blows the situation out of proportion, because then the defense teams can, hack around, and they can find ways to get their client off the hook. They're even talking about this, after Dylan Roof, the South Carolina shooter who shot up a church in Charleston, South Carolina, was arrested. He was given food from Burger King. Anders Behring Breivik, the Norwegian bomber in 2011, was given a pizza from Domino's. And, why are they doing this for people? Why are they buying them fast food? Well, if they don't give them something to eat, and something normal to eat, then the defense teams can just be like, hey, you violated their rights. Hey, they were not given fair treatment, they were not given humane treatment, and they can get off on things like that. So the law is very much interconnected. And if you try to kind of violate one area of the law, it can also deal with some other areas of the law that might also cause problems for the trial down the road, law and order and all that. But when we're specifically talking about the case of Jens Soering, since being in prison, he has become a very prolific author. He's written multiple things about it, as well as Elizabeth Haysom. She also became somewhat of a columnist, I guess you would call it, for a local newspaper. Yes, both of them were sentenced to prison. Jens Soering was given life in prison for the murders, and Elizabeth Haysom, as we said, was given 90 years, but she will be released in 2032 when she is 68 years old, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but she definitely will be released in 2032. I forget, her exact age and all this. But the thing is, though, is that they say that Jens Soering was a model inmate. He never had a single infraction. And what they really just want to try and show is that there is a very high likelihood that he did indeed not commit these murders, that he was someone who kind of falsely confessed to these, kind of under pretenses that turned out to be untrue. But the thing is, though, I mean, that is probably one of the worst situations that you would want to be in. And it might sound a little bit harsh, but he probably is completely aware of how badly he messed up. And he's probably aware that he was kind of asking for this situation to confess to a murder that he didn't commit. Once again, it happens all the time. And the whole concept, though, in terms of the law about why would somebody confess to a murder that they didn't commit, sometimes you hear people saying, if I were innocent, I would have taken this deal. I was watching an episode of Dateline once, and they were talking about, somebody was facing life in prison for a murder, and then they offered them a plea deal of, it was either 5 years or 7 years or something, and the lawyer was like, if I were innocent, I would have taken that deal. I don't know about you guys. I don't think I could serve 5 years in prison for something that I know I did not do. I mean, if that's just kind of the deal that you're offering, unless you're in some situation like Jens Soering, where somehow he was kind of brainwashed into confessing to a murder that he didn't commit, and that's your only way out, and then you just got to be like, all right, well, 5 years or life in prison where he is now. But he's been through numerous parole board hearings, and he has been denied, and they've also tried to get him back to Germany, and he has been denied that as well. We saw some similar things with the case of Annika Ersberg, who was involved in something called the stolen meat murders, where she was an accessory to murder as well, an accomplice, and she was given 28 years or something, and they were really trying to extradite her back to Sweden to serve because Sweden has a more lenient legal system, and even just serving 28 years in prison was much less than, that's much more than almost any other Swedish national in the world who has served in prison time. I believe she was actually given life, but she was able to get out after 28 years. She has since been released, and she has a TED Talk online. Once again, her name is Annika Ersberg, if anyone wants to see that. But this just goes to show you that when people are citizens and nationals of a different country, it really brings up a lot of questions. And, it really depends on the type of extradition law and agreements. And that's what we're dealing with the case of In Young-yu right now, the Korean woman who brainwashed her boyfriend in Boston into committing suicide using lots of things like psychological abuse. She is in South Korea, and they want to bring her back to the United States for the trial, but because we don't have the extradition treaty with South Korea, then it's she will only be tried unless she comes back voluntarily, or they use something, what is it called, the Interpol Red Warrant or something like that. It's a messy situation, and that's what Jens Soering was dealing with firsthand. Elizabeth Haysom was actually not American either. She was a Canadian national, and that is one of the reasons why they bonded when they met at the University of Virginia. They were both foreign students, and Elizabeth Haysom was educated in Switzerland and England. She has a British accent, even though she's a Canadian citizen, and they sort of bonded over being the type of, they're both sort of international students. And Jens Soering is described as someone who is absolutely brilliant. He's a very articulate individual, and the problem is just that he got duped by a woman, allegedly. So the story goes, and it seems like that he is now serving more than 30 years in prison so far, and I don't know if he will be released. I mean, this documentary, Killing for Love, came out in 2016 when it appeared in Munich, and in 2017, I believe it was distributed in the United States. And it still seems like, as of today, 2019, he has not been released. But one of the things to say about this one is just that it's sometimes mistakes can haunt you. Sometimes people can make mistakes that are kind of, that are just putting them in prison for life. And you see this so frequently with people who are kind of with individuals who are in crimes. People are in jail for crimes they didn't commit. Some of them are persisting their innocence. We don't know 100%. Other people seem like they very much have a strong case to stand on that they did not commit these actions. Another one that we could look into on this channel is called the Lipstick Murders in Chicago. It is tied to the kind of potential serial killer George Hill Hodel. His son Steve says that his father committed those murders and not the person that they actually have in jail. But supposedly the person in jail only confessed to it because he was tortured by the police, even putting ether on his testicles and such. I don't know how they got away with that one, although it was 50 or 60 years ago. And once again, that's the Lipstick Murders in Chicago. and we might look into that one in the future. But I highly recommend anybody watch the documentary Killing for Love, which is about Jens Soering and Elizabeth Haysom. Elizabeth Haysom turned down the possibility of being interviewed for it. It is dense, though. Oh, I mean, some things are fast-moving, and I really kind of got used to that sort of 44-minute presentation that most true crime things use. Forensic Files uses 22 minutes, but it's like, this is 2 hours long, and it is one dense film, a very dense presentation. But there's a lot of information about the death of Elizabeth Haysom's parents and the imprisonment of Jens Soering, who is still held in a Virginia Correctional Institute. Well, anyway, that's all for me now, and if you have anything to say about any of the material that we've discussed in this upload, please drop a comment below. If you like this upload, you can hit the like button, and that's all for me. Until next time.